Lee Dae-ho walked through the wide corridors of the Galactic University of Xenobiology. The walls were made of some kind of blue crystal that glowed softly. Strange plants from different worlds grew in pots along the walkway. Students of many, different species hurried past him, carrying their books and talking in languages he could not understand. Dae-ho was 22 years old and came from Earth. He was the first human student ever to attend this famous university. His black hair was cut short, and he wore simple clothes, blue jeans and a white shirt. In his backpack, he carried his lunch that his roommate Park Jun-sik had made for him that morning. The other students looked at him with curious eyes as he passed. Some whispered to their friends when they saw him. Dae-ho knew they were talking about him. Humans were new to the galactic community. Most aliens had only heard stories about Earth and its people. He found the classroom for Advanced Predator Studies and stopped at the door. Through the clear wall, he could see students already sitting at their desks. The classroom was much larger than any room back on Earth. The ceiling was very high, and the desks were arranged in a circle around the center of the room. Dae-ho took a deep breath and walked inside. The talking stopped as every eye turned to look at him. He counted about 30 students in the room. There were tall, thin beings with purple skin and 4 arms. Small, furry creatures with big eyes sat next to larger students who looked like walking trees. In one corner, he saw students with blue skin and 3 eyes. Professor Kale Theron stood at the front of the room. He was a Zentaurian, which meant his body was made of living crystal. When he moved, light danced across his surface in beautiful patterns. His voice was deep and musical when he spoke. "Ah, our human student has arrived," Professor Theron said. "Please take a seat anywhere you like." Dae-ho found an empty desk near the middle of the room. As he sat down, a blue-skinned student with 3 eyes turned to look at him. She had long silver hair and wore a simple green dress. Her 3 eyes blinked one at a time as she studied his face. "You are the human from Earth," she said in perfect English. Her voice was soft and curious. "I am Kim So-jin. I come from Altair 7. Nice to meet you," Dae-ho replied with a small smile. "Yes, I am from Earth. This is my first day in this class." So-jin's middle eye focused on him while her other 2 eyes looked around the room. "I have read about your planet. They say it is very dangerous. Is that true?" Before Dae-ho could answer, Professor Theron began the class, the crystal being moved to the center of the room, and all the students turned their attention to him. "Today we begin our study of the most dangerous predators in known space," the professor said. His crystal body sparkled as he spoke. "In this class, you will learn about creatures that can kill with a single bite, hunt in perfect silence, and survive in places where nothing else can live." A small, furry student in the front row raised her hand. "Professor, why do we need to study such scary things?" Professor Theron's crystal surface changed color, showing his amusement. "Knowledge is power, young Velix. Understanding these predators helps us stay safe from them. It also helps us protect other species who might encounter them." Dae-ho listened carefully as the professor explained the different types of predators in the galaxy. There were hunters that could turn invisible, creatures that could eat through metal, and beasts that could survive in the cold vacuum of space. "Earth is classified as what we call a death world," Professor Theron continued. His crystal eyes looked directly at Dae-ho. "This means it is a planet so dangerous that only the strongest creatures can survive there." The other students turned to stare at Dae-ho again. He felt his face grow warm with embarrassment. Sojin leaned closer to him and whispered, "Do not worry. Most of us are just curious about Deathworlders." "Deathworlders?" Daeho whispered back. "Species that come from dangerous planets," Sojin explained. "Like you." Professor Theron walked around the room as he talked. "The most famous Deathworlders are the Krillians. They are warriors who can fight with their bare hands and feel no fear. But they are not the only ones." He stopped near Daeho's desk. "Humans are also Deathworlders, though they are very different from Krillians. Where Krillians use strength and rage, humans use their minds and work together." A tall purple student raised one of his forearms. "Professor, if humans are Deathworlders, why do they seem so normal?" Several students laughed softly at this question. Daeho felt his cheeks burn with shame. Professor Theron's crystal surface grew brighter. "That is an excellent question, Zorlak. Humans may look peaceful, but appearances can be deceiving. On Earth, humans became the top predators not through size or strength, but through intelligence and cooperation." The professor moved to a large screen on the wall. Pictures of Earth appeared, showing forests, oceans, and mountains. "Earth has many dangerous creatures, giant bears, poisonous snakes, sharks in the water, yet humans learned to hunt them all." Jin's three eyes grew wide as she looked at the pictures. "How did they do that?" she asked. "Humans learned to make tools," Professor Theron explained. "They also learned to hunt in groups. A single human might run from a bear, but 10 humans with spears could kill it." Daeho watched his classmates as they learned about his home planet. Some looked interested, others seemed worried. He thought about his morning run through the university's safe gardens and smiled. These aliens had no idea what Earth was really like. The professor continued his lesson for another hour. He talked about hunting strategies, survival skills, and the way predators thought. As the class went on, Daeho noticed that his classmates kept looking at him. Some seemed afraid, others just curious. When the lesson was almost over, Professor Theron made an announcement that changed everything. "Next week, we will have a very special demonstration," he said. His crystal body pulsed with excitement. "The university has arranged for us to observe a live shadow maw." Every student in the room became very quiet. Sojin's blue skin turned pale, and her three eyes went wide with fear. "A shadow maw?" squeaked the small, furry student named Velix. "Are you sure that is safe, Professor?" Professor Theron's surface sparkled with confidence. "Of course it will be safe. The creature will be held in a special containment field. We will observe it from a safe distance to learn about its hunting behavior." He looked around the room at all the worried faces. "The shadow maw comes from the death world Zerion. It is one of the most efficient predators in the galaxy. This will be an excellent chance to see a true apex predator in action." After class ended, Daeho packed his books slowly. Jin waited for him by the door. "Are you worried about next week?" she asked. Daeho thought about her question. He had seen documentaries about dangerous animals on Earth. Tigers, crocodiles, great white sharks. They were all scary, but humans had learned to study them safely. "I think it will be interesting," he said. "What about you?" Jin's three eyes blinked nervously. "Shadow maws are very dangerous. They can turn invisible and walk through walls. Many scientists have died trying to study them." As they walked out of the classroom together, Daeho wondered what made this shadow maw so much more dangerous than the predators on Earth. He would find out soon enough. 1 week later, Deho walked into the Advanced Predator Studies classroom and immediately knew something was different. The room had been changed completely. Strong metal barriers surrounded the center area, and bright warning lights flashed on the walls. Security guards in heavy armor stood at each door. So-Jin was already at her desk, her 3 eyes darting nervously around the room. Her blue skin looked even paler than usual. When she saw Deho, she waved him over quickly. "I could not sleep last night," she whispered as he sat down. "I kept thinking about the Shadow Maw. My research says they have killed over 200 scientists in the last 50 years. Deho looked around the classroom. Every student seemed afraid. The small, furry student Velix was shaking in her seat. The tall, purple student, Zorlak, kept checking the exits with all 4 of his eyes. Even the tree-like students, who were usually very calm, had their branches pulled tight against their bodies. "Maybe it will not be so bad," Deho said, trying to make So-Jin feel better. Professor Theron said the creature would be in a containment field. So-Jin's middle eye focused on him while her other 2 eyes watched the metal barriers. Containment fields can fail, and Shadow Maws are very smart. They know how to escape. Professor Theron entered the room, his crystal body glowing brighter than usual. Behind him came several technicians wearing thick protective suits. They carried strange machines that hummed with energy. "Good morning, students," Professor Theron said. His musical voice echoed in the changed classroom. "Today you will witness something very few beings have ever seen. A living Shadow Maw in a controlled environment." The technicians began setting up their equipment around the metal barriers. Deho watched them work and noticed their hands were shaking. Even the experts were nervous. "The Shadow Maw comes from Zirion, a world of eternal night," Professor Theron explained. "These creatures evolved to be perfect hunters in complete darkness. They can change the color of their skin to match anything around them. They can also shift their body to pass through solid objects." Velix raised a trembling paw. "Professor, how do we know it cannot escape?" "The containment field uses quantum energy," Professor Theron replied. "Even a Shadow Maw cannot phase through quantum barriers, and we have backup systems in case of any problems." One of the technicians approached the professor and whispered something in his ear. Professor Theron's crystal surface flickered with concern for just a moment, then returned to its normal glow. "The creature is being brought up from the secure holding area now," he announced. "Please move your desks back as far as possible and remain completely quiet." The students quickly pushed their desks toward the walls. Deho found himself pressed against the back corner with So-Jin beside him. Her 3 eyes were fixed on the metal barriers in the center of the room. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The security guards straightened up and checked their weapons. Through the clear classroom walls, Deho could see a group of people in full armor suits pushing a large metal container on wheels. The container was the size of a small car and covered in warning symbols. Strange sounds came from inside it. Scratching noises and low growls that made Deho's skin crawl. Whatever was in there was not happy. "Remember," Professor Theron said as the container was wheeled into the room, "Shadow Maws are extremely intelligent. Do not make eye contact with it. Do not make any sudden movements. And do not speak unless I give you permission." The technicians connected cables from their machines to the container. Lights began flashing on their control panels. Slowly, one side of the container began to open like a door. For a moment, nothing happened. The opening was completely black, as if the container was empty. Then something moved in the darkness. The Shadow Maw emerged slowly into the containment field. Daeho had expected something large and frightening, but the creature was only about the size of a big dog. It looked like a panther made of living shadow. Its fur was so black it seemed to absorb light around it. But as Daeho watched, the creature's appearance began to change. Its black fur shifted to match the gray metal of the barriers around it. Then it turned blue like the crystal walls. The Shadow Maw was becoming invisible right before their eyes. "Amazing," Professor Theron whispered. "Watch how it tests its prison." The Shadow Maw moved around the edge of the containment field, pressing against the invisible barrier with its paws. Its body flickered as it tried to phase through the quantum field. When that did not work, it sat back on its haunches and studied the room. Daeho felt a chill run down his spine. The creature was not just looking around randomly. Its eyes moved from student to student, studying each one carefully. It was learning about them, figuring out who was the weakest and who might be the most dangerous. "Its behavior is fascinating," Professor Theron continued. "See how it evaluates potential prey. Shadow Maws always identify the easiest targets first." The creature's gaze fell on Velix, the small furry student. It stared at her for a long moment, and she began to whimper with fear. Then its eyes moved to Sojin. Her blue skin had turned almost white with terror. When the Shadow Maw looked at Daeho, he felt something strange happen. The creature's eyes met his, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Daeho did not feel afraid. Instead, he found himself studying the creature just as it was studying him. The Shadow Maw tilted its head slightly, as if confused by Daeho's reaction. Most prey animals would look away or show fear, but the human just watched it calmly. "Excellent," Professor Theron said. "Now you can see why these creatures are such effective predators. They can read the emotions and intentions of other beings just by looking at them." That was when everything went wrong. One of the technicians looked down at his control panel, and his face went pale. He began pressing buttons frantically and whispering into his radio. Other technicians noticed and gathered around him, their voices growing louder with worry. "Professor," one of them called out, "we have a problem with the primary containment generator." Professor Theron hurried over to the control station. Daeho could not hear what they were saying, but he could see the worry on their faces. Red warning lights began flashing on several machines. The Shadow Maw noticed the change immediately. It moved to the part of the containment field closest to the failing equipment and began pressing against the barrier again. This time, Daeho could see small ripples in the air where the creature touched the field. "Everyone remain calm," Professor Theron announced, but his voice was no longer steady. "We are experiencing a minor technical difficulty. Security is on the way." Sojin grabbed Daeho's arm with her trembling hand. "The field is failing," she whispered. "Look at the barrier." Daeho could see it too. The air around the Shadow Maw was becoming less solid, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. The creature pushed harder against the weakening barrier. Suddenly, there was a loud crackling sound. Sparks flew from one of the control machines. The technician operating it jumped back with a cry of alarm. The containment field flickered and went out. For one terrible moment, the Shadow Maw stood perfectly still, as if it could not believe its luck. Then it smiled, showing teeth that gleamed, like white knives in its shadow-black face. Chaos erupted in the classroom. Students screamed and ran for the exits. Chairs fell over as everyone tried to get away from the center of the room. The security guards raised their weapons, but they were afraid to shoot with so many students running around. The Shadow Maw leaped onto one of the overturned desks and crouched there, its head turning back and forth as it decided which target to choose first. Its body flickered between different colors as it prepared to hunt. Professor Theron was shouting into his radio, calling for emergency backup. The technicians were trying to restart their machines, but Deho could see it would be too late. The creature was free, and it was ready to kill. The Shadow Maw's eyes fixed on a group of students who had been too slow to reach the exits. Velix was among them, crying with terror. Sojin was there too, frozen with fear against the wall. The creature gathered itself to jump. That was when Deho did something that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of running away like the other students, he stood up and began walking toward the Shadow Maw. "Deho, no!" Sojin screamed. "What are you doing?" But Deho was not listening to her. Something deep inside his mind had awakened when he saw the predator preparing to attack his classmates, something that had been sleeping since his ancestors. First picked up stones to hunt mammoth on the plains of Africa. The human was no longer running from the predator. The human was walking toward it. Deho walked toward the Shadow Maw with slow, steady steps. Every other student in the room was screaming or running, but he moved like he was taking a peaceful walk in the park. His hands hung loose at his sides, and his breathing was calm and even. The Shadow Maw had been ready to jump on the terrified students near the wall. But when it saw the human approaching, it stopped. Its head turned toward Deho, and its glowing eyes narrowed with confusion. Something was wrong. In all its years of hunting, the Shadow Maw had never seen prey walk toward it like this. Prey animals ran away or froze with fear. They did not stride forward with confidence and meet its gaze directly. Sojin pressed herself against the wall, her 3 eyes wide with terror. "Deho," she whispered, "please run. It will kill you." But Deho did not run. As he walked closer to the creature, something strange happened to his body language. His shoulders squared and his spine straightened. His eyes focused on the Shadow Maw with intense concentration. Even his smell changed. The scent of fear disappeared, replaced by something else entirely. The Shadow Maw took a step backward. This had never happened before. Nothing ever made a Shadow Maw retreat. These creatures were apex predators, the most feared hunters in the galaxy. They did not back down from anything. But there was something about this human that felt familiar yet wrong. The way he moved reminded the Shadow Maw of its own kind, confident, purposeful, deadly. Yet this creature looked nothing like a Shadow Maw. It had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons at all. Professor Theron stopped shouting into his radio and stared at the scene before him. "What is he doing?" he whispered to one of the technicians. No one approaches a free Shadow Maw like that. Deho was now only 10 feet away from the creature, close enough that it could leap on him in a single bound, close enough that its claws could tear him apart before he could blink. Instead, the 2 predators stood perfectly still and studied each other. The Shadow Maw's camouflage flickered rapidly, through different colors, black, gray, blue, then back to black again. This was a sign of confusion and uncertainty. Its instincts were telling it to attack, but something deeper was warning it to be careful. Deho looked into the creature's glowing eyes and felt a strange sense of recognition. He had seen that look before, though never in an alien predator. It was the same expression he had seen in the eyes of tigers at the zoo, wolves in nature documentaries, and sharks in the ocean. It was the look of a hunter deciding whether something else was prey or competition. In his mind, Dae-ho could hear the voice of his grandfather, who had been a soldier in the Korean War. "Never show fear to a predator," the old man had told him when he was just a boy. "Look it in the eye and let it know you are not food. You are something to be respected." The shadow maw slowly lowered its body into a crouch, its muscles tensed as if it was preparing to spring. But there was hesitation in its movement. The creature was not used to feeling uncertain about anything. Around the room, the other students watched in horrified fascination. Even the security. Guards had stopped moving, afraid that any sudden action might trigger an attack. Dae-ho took another step forward. Now he was close enough to touch the creature if he reached out his hand. The shadow maw's lips pulled back to show its razor-sharp teeth, but it did not attack. "Impossible," Professor Theron breathed. "Shadow maws do not hesitate. They do not wait. They kill." But this shadow maw was waiting. It was studying the human with the same intensity that Dae-ho was studying it. Two apex predators, separated by millions of years of evolution and countless light years of space, were having a conversation that needed no words. The creature's head tilted slightly to one side. Its eyes narrowed further as it tried to understand what it was seeing. This small, soft creature had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. It should be easy prey, yet everything about its behavior screamed danger. Dae-ho felt his heart beating fast, but not with fear. It was the same feeling he got when he was competing in martial arts tournaments back on Earth. Excitement mixed with focus. His mind was completely clear, aware of every sound and movement in the room. He began to understand what was happening. The shadow maw was a solo hunter, like a tiger or a leopard. It relied on stealth and surprise to kill its prey quickly. But humans were different. Humans were pack hunters who used tools and planning to take down creatures much larger than themselves. The shadow maw could sense this difference. It knew it was facing something that hunted in ways it did not understand. Very slowly, Dae-ho reached, behind his back toward his backpack. The movement was deliberate and non-threatening, but the shadow maw tensed immediately. Its claws extended from its paws, ready to strike. Sojin made a small sound of terror. She was sure Dae-ho was about to be torn apart. But Dae-ho continued his slow movement. His hand disappeared into his backpack and emerged holding something, wrapped in plastic. The shadow maw's nostrils flared as it caught an unfamiliar scent. It was his lunch. The sandwich that his roommate Junsik had made for him that morning. The creature's eyes fixed on the object in Dae-ho's hand. It could smell meat and bread and other things it did not recognize. Food smells, but not threatening ones. Dae-ho unwrapped the sandwich with careful movements. Inside was sliced beef, lettuce, tomato, and cheese on fresh bread. Simple earth food that Junsik had learned to make from watching cooking videos. The shadow maw watched every movement. Its body was still tense and ready to attack, but curiosity was beginning to overcome its hunting instincts. Without breaking eye contact with the creature, Dae-ho knelt down and placed the sandwich on the floor between them. Then he stood up and took several steps backward. The gesture was clear. He was offering food to the predator. Professor Theron's crystal body flickered with amazement. "He is sharing his meal with it," he whispered. "But why would he do that?" Sojin understood before anyone else. Her studies of human evolution suddenly made perfect sense. "It is what pack hunters do," she said softly. "They share food to show They are not enemies. The shadow maw stared at the sandwich for a long moment. No prey animal had ever offered it food before. Prey animals ran or fought or begged for mercy. They did not give gifts. Slowly, the creature approached the offering. Its nose twitched as it sniffed the unfamiliar smells. Earth food was unlike anything on its homeworld of Zerion. The shadow maw looked up at Deho one more time. The human stood perfectly still, showing no fear or aggression. His posture was relaxed but alert, like a wolf pack leader watching a rival from another pack. The creature made its decision. It lowered its head and took a bite of the sandwich. The room was completely silent except for the sound of the shadow maw chewing. Students who had been running for the exits stopped and turned to watch. Security guards lowered their weapons slightly, though they kept them ready. Deho felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he did not let it show on his face. This was not over yet. The creature had accepted his offering, but that did not mean it was safe. He needed to maintain the delicate balance of respect and strength that kept predators from fighting each other. The shadow maw finished eating the sandwich and sat back on its haunches. Its camouflage had stopped flickering and settled into a neutral gray color. The tension in its muscles relaxed slightly. For the first time since the containment field had failed, the creature was not actively hunting. But Deho knew that could change in an instant. Shadow maws were still dangerous, even when they were calm. He needed to keep its attention focused on him until help arrived, so he did something that would have seemed insane to anyone watching. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged, about 6 feet away from one of the galaxy's most deadly predators. The shadow maw tilted its head again, clearly puzzled by this behavior, but it did not attack. Instead, it lay down on its belly, like a giant cat resting in the sun. Two apex predators, from worlds that had never known each other existed, had found a way to coexist in the same space without violence, at least for now. The classroom remained frozen in silence as Deho and the shadow maw sat facing each other on the floor. The creature had finished eating his sandwich and now watched him with calm, intelligent eyes. Its body was relaxed, but Deho could see. It was still ready to move quickly if needed. Minutes passed like hours. So-Jin pressed against the wall, her 3 eyes never leaving the scene before her. She could not believe what she was seeing. A human and a shadow maw were sitting together peacefully, like old friends having a quiet conversation. Professor Theron whispered urgent words into his radio. "Yes, I understand the security team is on the way," he said quietly. "But do not use stun weapons yet. The situation appears to be under control." Other students began to creep closer, drawn by curiosity despite their fear. They moved very slowly and stayed near the walls, ready to run if the creature became aggressive again. The shadow maw noticed their movement but did not seem bothered by it. Its attention remained focused on Deho, who continued to sit perfectly, still with his legs crossed. He breathed slowly and evenly, keeping his body language calm and non-threatening. Inside his mind, Deho thought about what his grandfather had taught him about dealing with dangerous animals. "Respect them, but do not fear them," the old man had said. "Show them you understand the rules of survival, and they will respect you in return." The creature suddenly stood up and began to walk around Deho in a slow circle. Several students gasped and took steps backward, but Deho did not move. He turned his head to follow the shadow maw's movement, maintaining eye contact as it studied him from different angles. This was a test. The creature was checking to see if the human would panic or try to run when it moved closer. But Dae-ho had grown up hearing stories about his grandfather's encounters with bears and tigers during the war. He knew that running from a predator was the worst thing you could do. The Shadow Maw completed its circle and sat down again, this time a little closer to Dae-ho. It was no longer treating him as prey. Instead, it seemed to regard him as something between an equal and a puzzle it was trying to solve. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. The university's emergency response team was finally arriving. Professor Theron quickly went to the door to meet them before they could burst into the room with weapons drawn. "Please move carefully," he told the security chief in a low voice. "The situation is stable, but any sudden movement could change that." The security chief was a large, armored being from the warrior planet Krell. He had fought Shadow Maws before and knew how dangerous they could be. When he looked through the doorway and saw a human sitting calmly next to the creature, his face showed complete shock. "How is this possible?" he asked Professor Theron. "Shadow Maws do not interact peacefully with other species." "I am not sure," the professor replied honestly. "But somehow this human has established a non-aggressive relationship with the creature." More security guards gathered in the hallway, along with veterinarians carrying tranquilizer equipment. But none of them entered the room. They all stared at the impossible scene before them. So-Jin finally found her courage and took a small step away from the wall. Her movement caught the Shadow Maw's attention, and it turned to look at her. She froze immediately, her blue skin pale with fear. But the creature did not show any aggression toward her. It simply observed her for a moment, then looked back at Dae-ho. It seemed to understand that the human was somehow protecting the other students. "It is accepting his leadership," So-Jin whispered to herself. Her studies of predator behavior were helping her understand what was happening. Shadow Maws are solitary hunters, but they still understand pack dynamics. Dae-ho heard her words and nodded slightly. She was right. The creature was treating him like the leader of a pack that included all the students in the room. As long as he remained calm and in control, the Shadow Maw would not attack his pack members. But he also knew this balance was very fragile. One wrong move, one sign of weakness or fear, and the creature's hunting instincts would take over again. The Shadow Maw suddenly lifted its head and sniffed the air. It could smell the armed guards in the hallway and sense their hostile intentions. Its body tensed slightly, and its camouflage began to flicker. Dae-ho noticed the change immediately. "Professor," he said in a calm, quiet voice, "please ask your security team to move away from the door. The creature can sense their presence, and it is making it nervous." Professor Theron quickly relayed the message. The security guards reluctantly moved further down the hallway, though they kept their weapons ready. The Shadow Maw relaxed again when it could no longer sense immediate threats. Its camouflage settled back to a neutral gray color, and it lay down on its belly like a resting cat. "How did you know to do that?" So-Jin asked softly. She had moved a little closer, though she was still ready to run if necessary, Dae-ho thought, about her question. "On Earth, we have many dangerous animals," he said. "My grandfather taught me that predators are not evil. They are just trying to survive like everyone else. If you show them respect and do not threaten them, sometimes you can coexist peacefully." "But Shadow Maws are different from Earth animals," So-Jin replied. "They are much more intelligent and dangerous. Intelligence makes them easier to communicate with, not harder," Dae-ho explained. "This creature understands that I am not its enemy. It also understands that attacking me or any of you would bring more danger to itself. The Shadow Maw seemed to be listening to their conversation. Its ears, which were almost invisible against its dark fur, twitched as they spoke. Professor Theron approached them carefully, moving very slowly so as not to startle the creature. "Day-ho," he said quietly. "The containment field generators have been repaired. We can reactivate the barriers if you can get the Shadow Maw to move back to the center of the room." Day-ho considered this. The safest option would be to trap the creature again and return it to its holding cell. But he looked into the Shadow Maw's intelligent eyes and felt that would be wrong somehow. They had established trust between them. To betray that trust would be dishonest. "What will happen to it after you contain it again?" he asked. Professor Theron looked uncomfortable. "It will be returned to the secure facility. The demonstration is over. And then? Then it will probably be destroyed. This escape attempt proves that it is too dangerous to keep alive for research." The Shadow Maw's ears twitched again. Day-ho was sure it understood every word they were saying. The creature's intelligence was far greater than anyone had realized. "There has to be another way," Day-ho said firmly. "This creature is not just a mindless killer. It is intelligent and capable of making choices. Look at it. It could have killed half the students in this room by now, but it chose not to." Sojin's 3 eyes widened as she realized what Day-ho was suggesting. "You want to save its life?" "I want to give it a chance," he replied. "The same chance that humans were given when we joined the galactic community." The Shadow Maw raised its head and looked directly at Day-ho. For a moment, their eyes met in perfect understanding. The creature knew its life was being discussed, and it knew that this strange human was trying to help it. Slowly, deliberately, the Shadow Maw stood up and walked back toward the center of the room where the containment field generators were located. But instead of fighting the barriers when they reactivated, it sat down calmly and waited. It was choosing to cooperate. Professor Theron watched in amazement as the containment field flickered back to life around the willing creature. "I have never seen anything like this," he said. "It is cooperating voluntarily." The security chief and his team finally entered the room, their weapons still drawn but no longer needed. They stared at the Shadow Maw sitting peacefully in its containment field like a well-behaved pet. "What do we do now?" the security chief asked. "Our orders were to destroy the creature if it escaped." Day-ho stood up and faced the armed guards. Something had changed in his posture and expression. The same confidence that had faced down the Shadow Maw now faced down the security team. "You will not destroy this creature," he said in a voice that carried absolute authority. "It has proven that it can choose peace over violence. That makes it a person, not just an animal." The security chief was twice Day-ho's size and heavily armed, but something about the human's presence made him hesitate. "You have no authority. Here, student, I have the authority of someone who just saved 30 lives, Day-ho replied calmly. "And I have the authority of someone who understands predators better than anyone else in this room." Professor Theron looked between the human and the security team, then at the Shadow Maw sitting quietly in its containment field. A new idea was forming in his crystalline mind. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should consider a different approach to this situation." 3 months had passed since the incident in Professor Theron's classroom. Day-ho walked through the university corridors, but now he noticed how different things had become. Students no longer whispered about him with fear in their voices. Instead, they nodded respectfully when they saw him. Some even asked for his help with their studies. The news of what happened with the Shadow Maw had spread throughout the entire galactic university system. Videos of the encounter had been studied by experts on dozens of worlds. Everyone wanted to understand how a human had managed to communicate peacefully with one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Day-Ho entered the Advanced Predator Studies classroom, which had been rebuilt and improved since the accident. The containment systems were now much stronger, and there were multiple backup safety measures. But more importantly, the entire approach to studying dangerous creatures had changed. So-Jin was already at her usual desk, reading from a thick book about human evolutionary history. Her three eyes looked up when Day-Ho sat down beside her. Over the past few months, they had become close friends as she helped him understand galactic culture, and he helped her understand human nature. "I finished reading about your planet's megafauna extinctions," she said, showing him pages filled with pictures of ancient Earth animals. Humans hunted creatures much larger than themselves: giant bears, massive cats with sword-like teeth, elephants bigger than shuttlecraft. "My ancestors were persistent hunters," Day-Ho agreed. "They might not have been the strongest or fastest, but they never gave up. They could track an animal for days until it was too tired to fight back." So-Jin's middle eye focused on him intently. "That is what I do not understand. Humans are clearly apex predators, but you also show kindness and mercy. How can you be both dangerous and gentle?" Before Day-Ho could answer, Professor Theron entered the classroom. His crystal body was glowing brighter than usual, which meant he was excited about something. Behind him walked a figure that made every student in the room turn and stare. It was Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the most famous xenobiologist in the galaxy. He was an elderly human with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had spent his entire life studying alien life forms and was considered the greatest expert on interspecies communication. "Students," Professor Theron announced, "we have a very special guest today. Dr. Tanaka has come from Earth to observe our new research project." Dr. Tanaka smiled and bowed slightly to the class, a gesture that made Day-Ho feel homesick for Earth. Customs. "Thank you for allowing me to visit," the elderly scientist said in accented but clear galactic standard. "I am here to learn about the remarkable work you have been doing." Professor Theron moved to the center of the room, where the containment field generators had been set up. But instead of holding a dangerous creature, the field now contained something that looked like a comfortable living space. There were soft cushions, water bowls, and even some plants from different worlds. "As you all know," Professor Theron began, "our approach to studying predators has changed significantly since the incident 3 months ago. We no longer treat dangerous creatures as mere specimens to be observed. We now recognize that, truly, intelligent predators are individuals with their own thoughts and feelings." He pressed a button on his control panel, and a section of the floor opened up. A platform rose from below, and on it sat the Shadow Maw. The creature looked healthier than it had during the escape incident. Its black fur was glossy and well-groomed. Its eyes were calm and alert as it looked around the classroom. When it saw Day-Ho, its ears perked up in what might have been recognition or even pleasure. "The Shadow Maw, we have named him Shadow, has been living in improved conditions for the past 3 months," Professor Theron explained. "Instead of being locked in a bare cell, he has a comfortable habitat with enrichment activities to keep his mind active." Dr. Tanaka stepped closer to the containment field, his experienced eyes studying the creature carefully. "And how has this change in treatment affected his behavior?" "Remarkably," Professor Theron replied. Shadow has shown no aggressive behavior since the incident. He has even learned to respond to simple commands and appears to enjoy interacting with our researchers. As if to demonstrate this point, Professor Theron called out, "Shadow, please show our guest how you greet friends." The Shadow Maw stood up and approached the edge of the containment field, closest to Dr. Tanaka. Instead of baring its teeth or showing signs of aggression, it sat down and tilted its head slightly. The same gesture it had made during its first peaceful encounter with Daiho. Dr. Tanaka's eyebrows rose in surprise. Fascinating. This creature is deliberately choosing to display non-threatening behavior. Exactly, Professor Theron said, his crystal body sparkling with enthusiasm. And it was young Daiho who first showed us that this was possible. All eyes turned to Daiho, who felt his cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. "I just treated him with respect," he said quietly. "The same way I would want to be treated if I was trapped and afraid." Dr. Tanaka walked over to Daiho's desk and studied the young man with interest. "Tell me, what made you decide to approach the creature instead of running away like the others?" Daiho thought carefully about his answer. "When I saw Shadow preparing to attack my classmates, something inside me woke up. I realized that he was just doing what predators do, trying to survive in a dangerous situation. But I also knew that humans are predators too, and predators can sometimes find ways to coexist. You saw him as an equal rather than a monster," Dr. Tanaka observed. "Yes, and I think he sensed that. Shadow is very intelligent. He understood that I was offering him a choice between violence and peace." So Jin raised her hand. "Dr. Tanaka, what does this mean for how we interact with other dangerous species in the galaxy?" The elderly scientist smiled at her question. "It means we need to completely rethink our approach to what we call Deathworld species. We have been treating them as threats to be contained or destroyed, when we should have been treating them as potential allies to be understood." He turned back to the class and gestured toward Shadow, who was now lying comfortably in his containment field. "This Shadow Maw has taught us that intelligence and predatory ability do not necessarily mean evil intent. Given the choice, he prefers peace to violence." Professor Theron nodded in agreement. "This research has implications far beyond xenobiology. The Galactic Council is now reconsidering how we classify and interact with Deathworld species throughout known space." Dr. Tanaka pulled out a small device and showed it to the class. "I have been authorized by the Earth government and the Galactic Council to offer Shadow something unprecedented: citizenship status in the galactic community." The classroom erupted in excited whispers. No non-sentient species had ever been granted such recognition before. "If Shadow accepts," Dr. Tanaka continued, "he will be the first of his kind to be treated as a person rather than an animal. He will have rights and protections under galactic law." Professor Theron looked at Daiho. "Since you established the first peaceful contact with Shadow, would you like to make the offer?" Daiho stood up and walked to the containment field. Shadow immediately came over to meet him, pressing against the barrier with obvious pleasure at seeing his human friend again. "Hello, Shadow," Daiho said softly. "We want to offer you something special. Instead of being a research subject, you can become a citizen of the galaxy. You would have your own home, your own choices about how to live your life." The Shadow Maw listened intently, its intelligent eyes fixed on Daiho's face. Even though it could not speak in words that others could understand, its body language made its answer clear. Shadow sat up straight and placed one paw against the containment barrier directly across from where Daiho's hand rested on the other side. It was a gesture of acceptance and trust. Dr. Tanaka activated his device, officially recording Shadow's acceptance of galactic citizenship. "Congratulations," he said to the Shadow Maw. "You are now the first recognized citizen of your species." Over the following weeks, Shadow was relocated to a comfortable apartment in the university's residential district. He learned to use simple communication devices and even began attending some classes as an observer. Students who had once feared him now stopped to say hello when they saw him in the corridors. Daiho visited Shadow regularly, often bringing sandwiches to share. They would sit together in Shadow's apartment, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes with Daiho reading aloud from books about Earth's predators. Jin often joined these visits, fascinated by the friendship between human and Shadow Maw. She was writing her thesis on interspecies communication and considered their relationship the perfect example of how different species could learn to understand each other. One evening, as Daiho was preparing to leave after one of their visits, Shadow did something unexpected. The creature went to a corner of his apartment and picked up a small object in his mouth. He brought it over to Daiho and set it down carefully. It was a simple stone, smooth and dark, that Shadow had somehow acquired, but the gesture was clear. He was giving Daiho a gift, just as Daiho had given him food on that first day. Daiho picked up the stone and smiled. "Thank you, Shadow. I will treasure this," as he walked back to his dormitory that night.